first I realized that I was brainwashed, and what the teachers taught me before I went to college are totally lies.
Hello and welcome to the Lifestyle Ship podcast. I'm your host, Lugo, and today I promise you that you'll experience a dramatic shift in the way that you think about individuality, thinking for yourself, and also the way that China treats its citizens. The guest that I bring on with me today is named Teng Biao, a human rights activist in China. He explains what it's like to be born in a society that brainwashes you and gives you no other option than to follow the government propaganda. He breaks down exactly what goes on in China and what it's like being born there. Before we begin, make sure you like and subscribe because I come out with new interviews every single day and I don't want you to miss it. I don't want to wait any longer for you to listen to this, so let's get it started. Okay, so first introduce yourself. Tell me all about you and tell me what you do.
Okay. So my name is Teng Biao. I was a scholar and human rights lawyer in China. Between 2003 and 2014, I taught at the China University of Political Science and Law in Beijing. And then I left China, and now I live in the United States as a adjunct professor at the City University of New York.
So currently, are you still a human rights activist for China, or do you just teach about China as an adjunct professor?
I do both. I'm also a human rights activist and a scholar.
So when you
And
say you're an
so
adjunct professor, when you say you're an adjunct professor,
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
are also a human rights, like that's your professional job, that you're a human rights activist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So my research focuses on human rights, political transition, criminal justice in China, and I'm teaching um, human rights in China at Hunter College.
Oh, okay. So tell me a little bit more about China itself. So especially during this whole coronavirus, um, let's say pandemic, during the whole pandemic, there's been a huge rush to blame China and talk about, the authoritarian regime in China and how they, haven't really been too honest with everybody. So what is your take on in terms of how honest they've been to everybody?
Um, yeah. So it's quite complicated. China is still a party state, one-party rule.
Mhm.
The human rights record in China is one of the worst countries in the world. Um, and many human rights defenders, citizen journalists, and dissidents were arrested and yeah, are imprisoned. Um, so the coronavirus, the outbreak in this January, um, was a perfect case that Chinese government doesn't respect human rights, and it reflects the governance failure in China. I've written a article arguing that it's uh, it's Chinese government's governance failure that make people lose the best time to fight the coronavirus. Um, and many whistleblowers were um, arrested or disappeared, and some and Chinese government censored the information very strictly. Even today, people are prohibited from criticizing the government or telling the truth about the coronavirus. Um, so and the Chinese government also um, utilized the technology to strengthen its total control on the society, on people. So uh, uh, Chinese government is now strengthening its my terminology, high-tech totalitarianism. It's not authoritarian, but a totalitarian system.
Really? Well, I think it's
Yeah,
interesting because, people there are so many things that are kind of like moving and going on that, the government is trying to take control of. For example, I thought it was super interesting how on the social media site Weibo, they that's sort of like their Twitter, and they were
yeah.
pretty much, I think there were 2 million likes, retweets, or views of this hashtag "We want freedom of speech" on Weibo. And the
Mm.
Chinese government, who actually has control over Weibo, decided that they were going to wipe out all of those tweets, and nobody was allowed to see them. So by the morning, they were all gone. What do you think is sort of the effect on the Chinese people in terms of, I know we're allowed to be able to see this as sort of outsiders, like, oh yeah, as Americans, we have this freedom of speech and we haven't had the sort of brainwashing that goes on in the Chinese government. So do you think the Chinese people are really, understanding of what's going on, or do you think that a lot of them are just brainwashed to the point where they don't understand that there's a freedom on the other side?
Um, yeah, in general, the propaganda and brainwashing work by the Communist Party is quite effective. Um, most Chinese people, old and young, are brainwashed. Um, but um, but since early 1980s, because of the economic reform and opening up policy, um, many people um, got the opportunity to read some books, some translated books from the West, and there were like a limited space for the traditional media and later the internet. Um, and so some people like me um, got enlightened in 1980s, 1990s, and also the first decade of 2000. Um, um, so, and there was a democracy movement in
Mm.
1989, ended up with Tiananmen massacre. So one thing is many many people realize the importance of liberal democracy and human rights, and they don't believe in the Communist Party and um, 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 like the people who commemorated the whistleblower Li Wenliang. They called for freedom of speech on Weibo and WeChat. Um, but but that's still the minority of the Chinese population. Uh,
It is.
um, and another thing is since 2013, when Xi Jinping took his office, um, the Chinese government censored the information uh, like more strictly than before. And the space for the civil society has been narrowed very much. Um, so um, so it's more and more difficult for the Chinese people to be enlightened, and that also means the propaganda and the brainwashing will be more effective. Um,
Well, do you think?
then then we'll see um, those so many people, the millions of millions Chinese people are supportive the Chinese government handling of coronavirus
Well, there's
and
also
other
there was
issues.
a very
Yeah.
big negative American sentiment for the coronavirus. I know that first the Chinese government was trying to blame America, then they were also trying to blame Italy, they were trying to blame a bunch of different countries for the coronavirus. And I think I think it was around 60% I saw in a recent poll that they were saying that 60% of Chinese people had a very negative view of America and their handling of the coronavirus. And I think that also definitely plays into sort of like the battle between the East and the West. I know you were talking about that with the books, right? Where a lot of people were reading Western books, but do you think that
Yeah.
the Chinese government is really trying to misrepresent what the West is doing, right? In terms of, what'd you say? Oh, no, I'm sorry. So yeah, they said, do you think that the Chinese government is really trying to misrepresent what the West is pretty much all about, just because of the fact that they're not really allowing a lot of Western ideas to spread to the East, and also they're not allowing people to read Western books and things like that.
Yeah, so the freedom of information, freedom of expression is very much limited in China. China is the biggest prison for writers and journalists. Um, and so, China is one of the two or three countries which uh, ban YouTube, Google, and Twitter, Facebook.
Yeah.
Um, so most Chinese people, the vast majority of Chinese people, cannot access to the information from the West, and even the current administration censors more universities and textbooks and publishings. Um, yeah, and another thing is Chinese Communist Party is always uses the nationalism uh, sentiment uh, to be against the United States and the Western capitalist countries. Um, because the Communist Party um, can can be benefit from the nationalism sentiment. They want to gain more solidarity, more loyalty from the people by resorting to nationalism.
So do you think that there's sort of any way that I know there's a lot of protests in Hong Kong and all that, but do you think there's any way that the Chinese government can really separate from the people, and there could be sort of like a coup of the Communist Party?
Um, yeah, the Communist Party has no legitimacy because there is no free and democratic election. So the political legitimacy is always issue
Mhm.
of the Communist Party, and they rule the country by violence and lies. So they will not give up their monopoly on military and media. That's the two most important things to maintain and prolong its one-party rule. They have clearly refused the effort of demonstration, and they will uh, refuse any demand from the civil society for a liberal democracy.
What have you so I know you deal a lot with human rights and specific cases in those human rights. What was the most sort of crazy and most violation the story with the most violation that you've seen?
Yeah, it's very crazy. Actually, Chinese government violates every human right in China,
Really?
and one thing we should not forget is the concentration camps in Xinjiang area that between 1 and 3 million Uyghur and other Muslim minorities were have been detained in concentration camps. Um,
Wow.
that is the worst human rights disaster in 21st century.
Do you know what they're like?
Um,
Are they very similar to like the Nazi concentration camps and the Russian gulags, or is it sort of not clear as to like what they're like at all?
um, these are concentration camps, um, even though it's not like Nazis concentration camps that putting 6 million Jews um, into into the
Gas chambers?
yeah, and um, uh, and
Yeah, so really, what are they like?
but I yeah, I mean the 1 to 3 million people in the concentration camps are brainwashed every day. They were forced to learn Chinese, to learn the propaganda songs, and they were forced to give up their religious and culture identity, um, and many. I think almost every detainee in the concentration camps um, has been tortured, and there are many reports that some women were raped, and some detainees have died in out of torture. Um,
Wow.
so it's kind of a culture genocide, and it's modern culture genocide because like a rape, torture, and death um, are rampant in the concentration camps.
Wow. Do you think so in the Chinese Communist Party, is there any religion or is it just all nationalism?
Um, before the establishment of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, in 1949, there were some traditional religions,
Mhm.
and some religions from the West, like Christian, um, and and uh, some Muslim, um, and Buddhism, and then the Communist Party persecuted all religions during Mao Zedong era.
Really?
But yeah, but the party um, has failed in eliminating the religions, and but they try to put all the religions in the party's control.
Well, what do you mean they
The
failed?
uh,
What do you mean that they failed?
they I mean the all religions were persecuted very severely during Mao Zedong era, but they didn't disappear. They still they survived the Mao Zedong's totalitarian rule, and then the Communist Party tries to control all religions by organizing their own official um, religious associations, like the five. The party recognized five major religions like Buddhism, Muslim, Catholic, uh, uh, Protestant,
Wow.
and Taoism. So all the believers are required to go to these official churches, official associations, religious associations. Um, yeah, but some
You can go.
yeah some people prefer not not to going the official churches, but the underground churches. And according to the research, the number of all religion, um, especially the Christians, is still increasing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any way for sort of like communism, like the Communist Party does, and religion to sort of coexist? Or is it sort of impossible in the fact that anytime that somebody observes God that is spiritual, that they can't really observe a God that is like a Communist Party, if that makes sense to you?
Um, yes, the Communist Party is a atheist political party, and uh, it encourages atheism. Um, but the party itself seemed to be the god.
Yeah,
So like the official ideology, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and the the cult of personality. So they want um, to serve as the god, but um, they are not God, and they are like corrupt officials, and the people are very unsatisfied with the rampant corruption. Um, so um, so they um, so more and more people go become believers, religion believers, and some Chinese people believe some small new religions, and um, which are labeled as evil cult by the government.
really. Wow.
Yeah.
So what are those sort of like underground religions like? Do they meet in secret and do they meet in just like houses or is there official buildings? What is it sort of like?
Yeah. So they for example, the Christian churches, underground churches, we call them house churches in China. So they just gather um, in somebody's house and do their Bible reading and worship Um, so the Chinese government didn't bother them too much before like 10 years ago. They did persecute some pastors, but not too many. Uh, and then um, um, and then they increased their persecution, and they made some new policies requiring all underground churches to register in local government, and many pastors and house church activists have been arrested and sentenced. Um,
Do they
yeah.
even allow for the Bible to be spread, or is the Bible one of the banned books in the Chinese government?
Um, it's not banned, but um, it is controlled, like the printing, the publishing, translating, like the all are controlled by the government. So in 2005, I was defense lawyer of pastor. He was sentenced to 4 years because he privately printed a lot of Bibles.
Oh, wow. So the printing of religious text is only controlled by the Chinese government. That's so interesting.
And the Quran, um, um, so in general, the government treats different religions differently. Um, Generally speaking, the Taoism and the is okay generally, and Buddhism is okay, but Tibetan Buddhism um, is persecuted very severely,
Really.
and the Muslim, especially the Muslim in Xinjiang area, are persecuted very severely, and um, like some so the evil cult like Falun Gong,
Yeah.
and some other small religious groups which are labeled as evil cults are persecuted very brutally.
Wow. So you say that the Chinese government really does restrict every single human right. And I assume that you're talking about all the ones that are sort of like listed in the Bill of Rights. Would you
Yeah.
sort of say, and I think this is super interesting. Would you say that the American government, the way like that we have it structured over here, do you think that it's sort of like the best potential system, or do you think that it's better, or there's a better system that could be in place rather than the American government and something that's a lot better than the Chinese government?
Um, yeah, if we look at the protection of fundamental human rights and freedom, the United States is not the best. It's very good. It's much better than China, than other authoritarian, totalitarian countries, of course. But it's not perfect, and it is not the best.
Where do we fall
Um,
short?
we uh, there are many index of freedom and human rights by different organizations like RSF, Reporters Without Borders, like Freedom House, Human Rights Watch, and they evaluate um, freedom and human rights situation country by country every year. So in general, the best system, the best countries in terms of freedom and human rights protection are the Nordic countries. So Norway, Finland, Iceland, Sweden, yeah,
Really?
and yeah.
Well, what makes them better than us in terms of, I'm sure, I'm not positive, but I assume that we have better freedom of speech, just in terms of the fact that that our economy is more free. But in terms of social rights afforded to the people, I think we might be a little bit behind, because I know that Finland and more of those Nordic countries are a little bit more egalitarian, which means that sort of like the men and the women are treated as equal instead of this sort of societal distance that we put between them and the gender roles.
Not really. These countries perform better not only in social rights and like welfare, but also democracy and freedom of speech and religious freedom. Yeah, it's better than the United States.
Well, do you know any examples of where we go wrong as Americans?
Uh, Not necessarily wrong, but mm, um, like the restrictions of media and journalists, like the influence of capitalists and uh, and yeah, so I think the freedom index calculates very some different elements. I don't know the details, but they have done that for many years. So it doesn't mean the United States is not a country of free speech. It is. It's one of the best. Uh, um, but there are 20 something, 30 countries better than America.
Wow. So do you think that the government, if we were to, well, the Nordic countries, they have a little bit more power, a little bit more government power than we have in terms of the redistribution of wealth and things like that. Do you think that the government should sort of take more power in terms of that, in terms of, adding more welfare, adding more social programs and things like that? Or do you think that would be sort of taking us on a path towards where the Chinese government is at currently?
Um, yeah, that's interesting. But we have to be clear about the difference between like welfare state in European countries
Mhm.
and authoritarian or totalitarian country like China, North Korea, um, or even um, Singapore. So they are very different. So in China, the Communist Party um, has has every power. They have the monopoly of power on military, judiciary, media, like the Congress, the government, everything is controlled by the single party.
Yeah,
Um, and in terms of social welfare, um, it's many people misunderstand that Chinese government has so many that power, so huge power, and then they can distribute the wealth to the poor. But actually, they are not. The Gini coefficient, which is a reflection of equality, wealth equality. So China is one of the worst. China is one of the highest Gini coefficient. So the poor people in China do not get do not get more social welfare. Um, and then the Nordic countries like most European, Western European countries, they have better welfare. That some countries have free medical care, free education, like that, um, and of course these like Norway, Sweden, these countries have very high rate of tax. It's it's theoretically controversial. Some people said it's bad because the government has so influential powers, and they it's easy for the government to abuse the power if there is so high tax rate. And um, but uh, but some other people argue that um, it's we have to take care of the unprivileged people, the poor people, and if we have freedom of expression, if we have separation of powers, and if we can have mechanisms to monitor, to track the power of the government, then it's okay. So I think it's I used to disagree with the welfare state, the high tax rate, but I changed my idea a little bit because I think it's an issue of public choice. They have different parties. They have left and right people,
Mhm.
and they can change their government by free election. And so I don't think it's a problem. The people voluntarily elect like a left-wing party, and they tolerate the high tax rate, and at the same time they want enjoy uh, the safety, they enjoy the free educational or free Medicare. That's a choice of the people, and that subject to change. Yeah.
It's something I think that's a problem that even like our founders of America, they sort of envisioned that it might become a problem that that one day that the government would be able to take up so much power. And the thing is, once you give that power to the government, it's a lot harder to then take it back, right? In terms of anything, in terms of distributing taxes a little bit more, or in terms of giving them more power,
Yeah.
in terms of any of the rights, freedom of speech, freedom of to bear arms, anything like that. It's sort of a little difficult to be able to take the power back. So do you think that even if we have that sort of mechanism to be able to take the power back, that the government would be able to relinquish it and take it back?
Mm. Um, yeah, the United States and other uh, like every other democratic um, country um, has separation of powers. The three branches of the government: legislative, administrative,
Judicial.
yeah, judicial. After the World War II, the, almost every country um, expanded its administrative power. So the power of the president um, has been increasing, obviously.
Definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, it has different reasons, but it's the fact. And the modern uh, governance, the modern management maybe requires the more power of the administrative branch. Um, so
Do you think that's a problem? The fact that the government is sort of like encroaching more and more powers, especially like the executive, right? Where we have like Donald Trump, who has who has, you know, even like Obama, Trump, they've all taken a lot more powers to the executive with more executive
yeah.
orders, things like that. Do you think that eventually the government is going to encroach more and more on the boundaries of like human rights and the balance between government power and human rights?
Um, yeah, so the expansion of presidential power can be problematic. Um, it can be a threat to civil society, to people's the private sphere, people's rights. Um, but but if we insist in the separation of powers, like if we sorry, if we um, um, if we defend the freedom of press, um, then and also the free elections, then and I mean we can limit um, the the danger of expanding presidential power to a tolerable level. It's not yeah that um, it is. I think it's almost inevitable that the administrative branch is increasing, but we should stick to some important mechanisms um, in order to limit the danger. Um,
It's
and
just
but
yeah. No, well, the thing is, we had like, especially in our country's past, which was super interesting. Like even in America, we had in 1944, right? There was the Korematsu versus U.S., which was the government actually allowed for Japanese internment camps, right? So I mean, like
mm,
that was during World War II. Even in the past, like that was something that was signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and they allowed for the government to take all these Japanese people and throw them into internment camps, which obviously, like now we understand, is very wrong. So,
yeah.
is there sort of a mechanism to be able to be like even in our government to be able to say like, you know what, if that case were to come up again, especially in times of crisis like World War II, or you know, even like the Cold War, or if we ever get into a World War III, anything like that, is there sort of a way for the government to sort of detract their powers and sort of take them back? Because even since World War II, we've only seen an expansion of powers. We've never really seen the government take back any powers.
Mm, yeah. Like detaining Japanese in the intern camps. Yeah, and it's totally wrong. And the discrimination against the African Americans
Yeah,
and the torture in Guantanamo
Guantanamo Bay. Yeah.
Guantanamo Bay. That's legally, politically, and morally wrong. Um, so we should always be cautious of the expansion of government power, no matter it's a legislative or an administrative power. Um, uh,
Actually, I have a question for you. I thought this was super interesting. Over in Canada, they had um, they had a law that was passed very recently that has since been extremely controversial. That it by definition restricted freedom of speech, but there feels like there's some sort of justification for it. It was it was a ban on certain words for transgender people. So, for example, if I wanted to be called a she and you called me a he, then that would be against the law, right? You'd actually be breaking the law. And a lot of people were saying that that's a violation of my freedom of speech, right? Especially like Jordan Peterson, he was very vocal about this, about saying that it's a violation of my freedom of speech. And if I were to take a little bit of my speech, actually the metaphor that he used was, if I were to get so up close to you to the point where it was a little bit uncomfortable, then you would take about 2 steps back, or you'd move about 2 inches back. And then if I keep coming closer to that point, then you'd go 2 more inches back. Then you'd keep doing that, and you'd keep going 2 inches, and eventually you wouldn't realize it, but eventually you'd be about 15 feet back, and you wouldn't even realize it. So his argument was that if you take a little bit of my freedom of speech now, then eventually you take more, more, and more, and keep encroaching my freedom of speech. And eventually it would be to the point where I'm 15 feet back and I didn't even understand where it all happened and when it all fell apart. So what do you think would your stance be, where you're sort of saying, you know what, it's a restriction on my speech, but it's also good for the transgender people?
Hmm. Yeah, is that the law in effect uh, in Canada?
Um,
Uh,
I don't know if they implemented it because there was a lot of
okay,
controversy.
okay. Um, yeah, I think that that's an interesting issue and worthy of debate, I think. Um, in terms of the discrimination, many countries have got huge improvement, uh, like for the black people, the LGBT people, now same-sex marriage is legal now, um, and and you know if you um, if you say something, if you write something um, which is discriminating the LGBT people or black people or women, um, that I think that's in general, that's still your freedom of expression. You have the right to say that or to write that, but but you will be um, criticized by the society, um, by maybe most of the people, and it's like a political correctness. Though some people don't like the word political correctness, but it's kind of a social restriction. You have the right, but if you say something disrespectful um, of women or gay, then then it's not correct. It's and then you will feel the social and cultural pressure not to say that again.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I think that's good. That means a lot of progress for the unprivileged people. Um, but but should we go further to legal level? Should we legally ban the word the discriminating against LGBT or black people? Um, I feel that will be too far.
I completely agree. I think it's super interesting how, in even in America, right, we still have people that support like Nazism, and and people that are still the KKK, and it's a very it's a really scary thing, because I understand how a lot of those people could be affected by it. The underprivileged groups, you could say. and and still to this day we still haven't had a restriction of freedom of speech, right? Like even if you are a Nazi, you as long as you're not saying something that is like imminently violent towards another person, you could say, I hate this group all that I want. And I think it's super interesting because there's a big rise upon mostly the left saying that this shouldn't be a thing, and that we should be able to restrict their freedom of speech legally. And uh, as someone who's sort of like seen the repercussions of this politically, especially in China where they restrict freedom of speech a tremendous amount, it seems it's definitely concerning. Definitely concerns me.
Um, yeah. Yeah. So the the line between freedom of speech and a crime, according to the Supreme Court, um, is clear and present danger.
Yeah.
Um, and then we see the difference between the United States and some European countries in terms of Nazi speech. If you say something supportive of Nazi or Hitler, uh, you are still under the protection of First Amendment in the United States. It's not a crime, but in Germany, in Austria, that's a crime. So that doesn't mean Germany or Austria have a worse protection of free speech. They have that. Uh, it seems so. It seems they 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 don't have a better protection of
Yeah.
speech in terms of Nazi Nazi expressions, but that's understandable. That can be justified because they have their special um, history of like a
Yeah.
Nazi disaster.
Yeah, well, that's super scary. It's their case is definitely a little bit more, controversial than ours, especially because of the crazy history
Yeah.
in Germany and all that stuff. Do you think that in China, there was a point where the government went from non-totalitarian to extremely totalitarian, or do you think it was always that way?
In history,
Yeah, in history, like even before Mao.
um, okay, so before the end of Qing Dynasty in 1911, China has a history of like a 2,000 year um, in empire
Imperial.
yeah, like it was called by some scholars as Oriental despotism.
Hmm.
Despotism, yeah. So the absolute power of empire. Um, it, and then in 2000, in 1911, China actually established the first republican system in Asia. It was a Republic of China, but unfortunately, it was overthrown by the Chinese Communist Party in 1949. Um, so, um, so it was, even uh, before Qing Dynasty, the emperor rule, it's not. Um, it has some similarity with totalitarian system, but it was not. It has not. Uh, we should say uh, before modernity, the absolute ruler um, or the had no capacity to achieve total control.
Mhm.
And so totalitarianism is kind of a modern phenomenon. They can achieve total control. They can eliminate the private sphere due to the modern technology. Yeah,
Interesting. Well, I mean, I think it's super cool how even with this modern technology and they're not allowing like YouTube, Google, like all those things, there's still a sort of intellectual dark web where people are still communicating and they're still sort of saying all the things that are going on in China. So it's definitely a select few, and it's definitely a small number of people. But in this dark web, there's um there's a lot of people that are really, telling the truth and being able to speak out about what's happening in China. Do you know anything about that?
yeah. By the way, the Communist Party could establish a totalitarian system because of some modern technology. But I mean, that kind of technology includes like the road, the train, the modern statistics like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the new information is the new high technology like internet, big data, facial recognition, artificial intelligence. Uh, these things, um, it's kind of complicated. Many people believe that this new information technology um, could empower the people because technically it's more difficult for a dictator to control internet than controlling a newspaper and magazine.
Right.
So then people can utilize the like social media, internet, um, that to get and spread the information, and it's easier for the civil society to organize a protest to mobilize people. So that's good. That's the positive aspect of the modern information technology. But on
Definitely.
the other hand, the Communist Party, a totalitarian or authoritarian um, government, of course, can utilize these technologies at the same time, and they use this technology to monitor people, to track people, to um, to um, put everyone in control. They have the big data, and they can use the facial recognition not only to control criminals, but also control like distance and everyone.
Do you know any examples of them doing that?
Yeah, that many like the social credit system that China has started a social credit system a few years ago, and they actually collected the information of every citizen's financial situation, how you behave on a plane or train, and what you posted on Weibo and social media, and then they have different level of the social credit. If your social credit is very low, and then you are not allowed to buy train tickets and plane tickets.
Well,
So many
what builds up your social credit? What are like the factors?
that like like I've said your whether or not you owe you didn't pay your bill, you post something on social media critical of the government, and you are involved in the crime or like a democratic movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Wow.
everything, even you like uh, you break the traffic rule, um, then that will lower your credit.
Wow.
Um,
So so
so
so what, let's say you have a lower credit. What effect does that have on you? Are you just not allowed to travel as much, or does it affect you, economically, your ability to get loans? Is it things like that?
right. Everything that the government can control.
Wow.
You
So they're
can
trying
get
to
loan from the bank. Yeah,
they want to make your life as crappy as possible. If
yeah. It's advanced version of 1984.
yeah,
That's really creepy. Yeah.
wow,
Um,
really crazy.
and also like facial recognition. The people, the government can identify you, and they can they know where you are and where you are traveling to, and then they yeah,
Sounds like Big Brother.
right. It's a
Exactly what it sounds like.
digital
They're
big
always
brother.
watching you.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So I want to be careful of your time, and I want to make sure that I'm not taking too much of your time. But I do have one final question. What was it that I think your story is absolutely fantastic. The fact that you were raised in a system where you're supposed to be brainwashed and you just weren't,
Mm.
right? You were able to transcend that and become a human rights lawyer to go against the Communist Party. What was it that allowed you to sort of go against the Communist Party and transcend everyone else around you?
Yeah, I was brainwashed um, before I went to a university. Like most other students and not only young people, so almost everyone um, has been brainwashed. But fortunately, I met some independent thinking professors at Peking University. That's the number one university in China, and I got the chance to read some Western books, um, and so that was 1990s when there was kind of space for the civil society, and then I accepted the first I realized that I was brainwashed, and I was what I what the teachers taught me before I went to college are totally lies. Um, and then I gradually accepted the idea of liberalism, and I started um, to know what is human rights, what is freedom, and the true history of Chinese Communist Party. So I decided to um, do something to promote human rights and democracy in China. So after I got my PhD, I became a scholar and at the same time human rights lawyer.
So tell me what it's like to be brainwashed. What is that like? Like what were like your ideologies before you were able to, meet those independent thinkers?
Um, I was not able to think independently, and I had no access to any information other than the textbooks and what the teachers told me. And I had never met a person um, uh, who who could challenge the official propaganda, official theories. Um, so and I was very supportive the government and the the country, kind of statism, nationalism, and yeah. Um, so it's not a belief after examining it. I believe that kind of stuff because I never had the chance to know something other than that. That's the only information I receive. So people, the brainwashed people are not able to use their own brain to think.
Wow. So if you had one message to any of the Americans who might be, watching in when I send this out, to what they can do to sort of support, um, the let's say the end of the maleficence, the end of the bad parts of the Communist Party in China. What do you think that they can do?
Yeah. Uh, so it's a long story, but simply speaking, um, the after Tiananmen massacre in 1989, the United States um, adopted the engagement policy toward China, and they believe most of the people, the scholars and the policy makers believed that the market economy, the globalization, um, the um, the engagement policy will guide China to open society and democracy. But for example, the American government granted China the most favored nation status in 1994, and later on it was changed to um, PNTR, the um, permanent trade partner status, and its idea is to de-link human rights to trade. Um, so if we look back, this kind of idea is totally wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, the United States and and all other um, democratic countries don't give sufficient pressure to China in terms of human rights violations. They care about doing business and earning money from China. And then so one thing the United States, the American people should do is to realize the uh, importance of human rights and the also the threat from a rising totalitarian regime. Chinese government violates human rights not only in China but also beyond its borders. There has been a lot of influence and interference from the Chinese Communist Party. It has been a threat to global freedom. Um, so so we should never give up um, the effort to promote human rights and democracy in China. And to spread to raise the awareness of the truth in China. That's the most important thing. That more and more people know what's happening in Xinjiang concentration camps, in Hong Kong democracy movement, in the black jails, where political prisoners are being tortured like that.
Wow. I completely agree. All right. Teng
Mm.
Biao, thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate you coming on a call with me.
You're welcome.